Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. Have you ever wondered why there are no windows on the wall behind me? We could have put windows in when we built the facility in 2011, but there was a specific reason why we did not. Many churches do have windows on the front wall of their sanctuaries. Sometimes around the cross, sometimes near the pulpit, sometimes right behind the altar. Especially in those places in this country that have some scenic views to look at. We have scenic views, we just don't have windows up there. Of course, part of the problem with the windows that are too low right behind the altar is that I would just be a silhouette. You couldn't see my face, which might be a good thing. But we don't have windows because of that. Even those windows up above cause some problems. And the windows up above cause problems because they serve as distractions to people during worship. Birds flying in the air, dark clouds rolling in. You might see some deer running across the property. Sunrises, sunsets, sun shining through the windows and into people's faces. It's a distraction. And of course, if someone is distracted, that means they are not listening. Even happens in this room. We don't have windows up front, but people are always distracted. If someone drives into the parking lot a little bit late on a Sunday morning, after the worship service has started, I know exactly when that happens. Not because I can see anyone driving into the parking lot, but I do see heads turn and look out the window because they see something in the periphery. When a kid gets up in the middle of the sermon and walks down one of these aisles and up the back, inevitably at least a dozen sets of eyes look at that child, not because they're being noisy or rude or loud or disruptive, but because they're moving. When someone drops a bulletin, someone bends down to pick it up, people will glance that way because of this minor commotion that they have to see what's going on. And of course, when someone is distracted, they're not listening. I'm not blaming you for any of these things. These things just happen naturally. Involuntary reaction when you see something move, you look at it. But that's my point. Our eyes can distract our ears in a variety of different ways, not just in worship service, of course, but in everyday life. That's exactly what happened to Peter and John and James on the Mount of Transfiguration. They saw some incredible things. They were supposed to see some incredible things. Jesus wanted them to see some incredible things. But their eyes distracted their ears from what they were supposed to be listening to the entire time. Think about that as I read this story one more time. Not what these disciples were supposed to see, but what these disciples were supposed to hear. Here's Luke chapter 9 from your bulletin. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at that time what they had seen. They told no one at that time what they had seen. they saw some incredible sights. They saw Jesus' face change in an unprecedented way. The gospel writer Matthew even says that Jesus' face shone like the sun. These three disciples saw Jesus' clothes just as bright as a flash of lightning. They saw Moses and Elijah, these great heroes of the Jewish nation, in person for the very first time. They saw Moses and Elijah and Jesus surrounded by heavenly glory, a splendorous glory. But that's not why they were there. They let their eyes distract their ears from what they were supposed to be doing in the first place. And what were they supposed to be doing? God the Father says it. A cloud comes over these three disciples, and God the Father says, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." Isn't that interesting, considering the story we're talking about today? We think about the story of Jesus' transfiguration as this magnificent visual display in front of the disciples, and it certainly was. What the disciples saw that day must have been seared indelibly into their minds for the rest of their lives. How could it not? How could they possibly forget the incredible glory and power of the Lord that they saw that day up on the mountain? That's not why they were there. That's not why they were mainly there. They were there to listen. Unfortunately, they had not been doing a very good job of listening at all. Luke says that in the middle of this event, when Moses and Elijah are there with Jesus, Moses and Elijah turn to leave. And so Peter jumps in and says, "Master, it's good for us to be here. And so let's put up a shelter for you, and then another one for Moses, and then another one for Elijah." Because Peter didn't want that day to end, and who could blame him? He wanted Moses and Elijah to stick around as long as possible so that they could revel in the glory of the Lord and bask in the presence of these famous Christians from centuries past. But God the Father was not about to let that happen, because that's not why the disciples were there. And so even when Peter was still speaking these words, Luke says, a cloud engulfs them, and God the Father says those words, "This is my Son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." That's why they were supposed to be there. To listen to him. That's why we are here too. We are here this morning to listen, not to see good friends and socialize, even though that's kind of a nice side benefit of being involved in a Christian congregation. We are not here to see how powerful the pastor preaches, or how well the musician plays, or how good the snacks taste. We are here to listen, and specifically to listen to the Son of God. Listen to his word. Just like Peter, James, and John, we let our eyes distract our ears, and we do not always listen very well at all. Jesus speaks to us. And Jesus tells us things like, "I am going to be by your side every step of the way. You don't have to be worried at all." But then when we see all the difficulties in our lives, and we see all those roadblocks in front of us, and we see all those situations out of which there is no way out as far as we can see, we do get worried and stressed and anxious, because we let our eyes distract our ears. We weren't listening. Jesus speaks to us. And he tells us, if you have him, you have everything. You don't need anything else. But when we see all the nice things in this life, and we see all the nice things that other people have, and we see all those nice things that we can enjoy, suddenly we aren't so satisfied anymore. Suddenly we aren't so content with what we have been given. We let our eyes distract our ears. We weren't listening. Jesus speaks to us, and he tells us that every single one of your sins has been completely forgiven, from the biggest to the smallest and everything in between. He has died, he has risen, he has guaranteed it. But when we look at our hearts and we see how awful and ugly and nasty we really are, we start to doubt those promises. We start to wonder if we really are forgiven after all, and that guilt engulfs us once again. Our eyes have distracted our ears, and we weren't listening. Just like Peter, John, and James. They weren't listening. And what exactly were Peter, John, and James supposed to listen to? Did you catch that in this story? It's not just about going forward. Listen to him whenever he talks to you again. But what had Jesus just been speaking about? He was having a conversation with Elijah and Moses up on that mountain. Do you remember what it was about? Jesus was talking to them about his departure that he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. And so Jesus was not talking about heaven with Moses and Elijah. He was not talking about what he was going to do with them once he got back up there. He was not talking to Moses and Elijah about what had happened to him on this earth up to that point. Jesus certainly wasn't talking to Moses and Elijah about something so trivial and mundane as the weather. He was talking about his departure from this life, what that was about to look like, and what that was about to accomplish. And so as Peter and John and James are right in front of them, Jesus is talking to Moses and Elijah about his betrayal and his arrest, his trial and his conviction, the torture and the interrogation and the death sentence. Jesus must have been talking about the cross and the blood and the pain and the grave. Maybe even Jesus was going so far as to speak about how the angels would come down and the rock would be rolled away and the tomb would be vacant and how the resurrection itself would take place. No wonder when Peter stood up and started speaking, God the Father overruled him and covered him with a cloud so that they couldn't see anything at all and said, listen to him. Listen to what he's saying. Take your eyes off Jesus' face. Take your eyes off Jesus' clothes. Take your eyes off Moses and Elijah. Take your eyes off the heavenly glory surrounding them and listen to him. Do you hear what he was saying? Do you realize what this means? Do you understand the eternal implications of Jesus' words? Listen to him. Shut your eyes. Close your mouths. And listen to him. Not too long after this, Peter and John and James were actually going to see what they were supposed to be listening to. They were actually going to see the betrayal and the arrest. They were actually going to see the trial and the torture. They were actually going to see the interrogations and the brutality and the march and the death sentence. They were going to be right there to the cross and the blood and the pain and the grave. They were going to be some of the first to witness Jesus after he rose from the dead. They were going to see it. We don't have that privilege. We obviously don't get to see those things in person with our own two eyes. And so now, more than ever, we need to listen. We need to listen to him who wants to tell us exactly what he told the disciples that day. Jesus wants to speak to us, and he wants to tell us about everything that he went through for us, and everything that he gave up for us, and everything that he won for us. Jesus wants to talk to you about his departure. And he wants to tell you that his departure was supposed to be the most awful and painful and excruciating experience that anyone could ever go through in this life, because that's what it took to save you. Jesus wants to talk to you about his departure and tell you that his departure was the culmination of the penalty of your sins, but it was also the victory that had been predicted for centuries past. Jesus wants to tell you about his departure, and that his departure was really exactly why he had come in the first place. He had not come to stay, he had come to leave. And his departure was filled with sorrow, so that your departure from this life could be filled with peace. Jesus wants to speak to you. Jesus wants to tell you everything. Listen to him. When Jesus tells you that you never have to worry ever again in your entire life, because he is right there by your side with you every single step of the way, listen to him. When Jesus tells you that you will never need anything else for the rest of your life because you have him, and he will supply you with everything else you need and even more, listen to him. When Jesus tells you that you never have to feel guilty about anything you do ever again because he has completely forgiven it by paying the ultimate price, listen to him. When Jesus says that you get to look forward to a place in his heavenly home, because he has guaranteed it by his cross and his tomb. He is giving you the gift of faith to believe exactly what he says. Listen to him. Don't worry about what other people say. Don't worry about what you read in books. Don't worry about what is rattling around inside of your own head. Don't worry about the flashing neon lights of this world. Don't let your eyes distract your ears. Listen to him. Close your eyes. Shut your mouths. And listen to him. Amen. Please stand.